Hi everyone, hope you're well. It's Miss Robinson from Pentland and I'm going to bring you your bedtime story tonight. Hope you're all taking care and keeping safe, and I'm sure there'll be many more stories posted on here over the next few weeks by other teachers. Fingers crossed. Okay, tonight our story is going to be The Magic Porridge Pot. Once upon a time there lived a little girl and her mother. Once upon a time there lived a little girl and her mother, and they were hungry. The cupboards were empty, the shelves were empty, and their bellies were empty. So the little girl took an empty basket and she walked out of the house and out of the village to see what she could find. She walked for a long time, and she walked for a very long time, until she saw a tangle of bramble bushes covered with fat blackberries. "These are what we need." She picked and she picked until the bushes were bare and her basket was full. Then she turned her heel and she set off for home. She walked for a long time and she walked for a very long time, but just as she was drawing close to home, she met an old woman. Thin as a scarecrow that old woman was, dressed in rags and tatters, her face as wrinkled as an old winter's apple. She looked at the little girl and she smiled a toothless smile. "Those are lovely fat bramble blackberries you have in your basket. My child, you couldn't spare a handful, could you, for an old grandmother without a tooth in her gums nor a penny to her name?" The little girl looked at the poor old woman and she forgot how hungry she was. "Of course I can," she said. "You can eat as many as you like." She held up the basket and the old woman dipped her shaking hand into the blackberries and scooped them into her mouth. Those are good blackberries, and you are a good girl with a kind and a tender heart. And because you've been good to me, I'll be good to you." The old woman reached beneath the rags and tatters of her shawl and pulled out a black iron pot. She pressed it into the girl's hands. "Here's a present for you, my child. It's a magic pot. Put it on the table when you get home and say, 'Boil, pot, boil,' and it'll give you all the porridge you can eat. When you've had your fill, just say, 'Stop, pot, stop.' Do you understand?" The little girl looked into the pot. "Yes," she said, "and thank you." But when she looked up, the old woman was gone. So she went home with the iron pot and the basket of blackberries. Her mother was very pleased to see her, and even more pleased when the little girl put the iron pot onto the table and said, "Boil, pot, boil." Straight away it was bubbling over with porridge. They filled one bowl, they filled another, and then the little girl said, "Stop, pot, stop." And the iron pot was as clean and black and empty as before. They fetched spoons and tasted the porridge. It was delicious, creamy and sweet. And when they stirred the blackberries into it, well, it was the best meal they had tasted in their lives. They went to bed that night with their bellies full and smiles on their faces. And from that day onwards, whenever they were hungry, the little girl would say, "Boil, pot, boil," and there would be porridge in plenty, and "Stop, pot, stop," when they'd had their fill. All was well and good until one day when the little girl's mother said, "Do you remember that time when we had blackberries with your porridge? Do you remember how good it tasted?" And the little girl said, "Yes, I remember, and if you like, I'll go and pick some more." She took the empty basket and she walked out of the house and out of the village. She walked for a long time and she walked for a very long time until she came to the tangle of brambles with their new crop of flat blackberries, and she began to pick. But while she was away, her mother was sitting at home, looking at the black iron pot on the table, and the more she looked at it, the hungrier she felt. "I'll just have one little bowlful," she thought, "just to pass the time." She fetched her bowl and turned to the pot. "Boil, pot, boil." Straight away the pot was bubbling over with steaming porridge. She filled her bowl to the brim. "Stop!" But the pot didn't stop. More and more porridge was bubbling over the rim. Soon the table was covered in porridge. She picked up a spoon and hit the pot. Stop! But the pot didn't stop. Soon the porridge was dripping onto the floor. Please stop! But the pot didn't stop. The floor was covered. The streaming porridge was flowing out of the door. She climbed onto a chair. Please, please stop! But the pot didn't stop. Soon the whole village was covered with porridge. People were climbing onto tables. They were climbing upstairs. Please, please, please stop! But the pot didn't stop. When the little girl came home at the end of the day with her basket full of fat blackberries, she saw a flood of streaming porridge lapping the gutters of the roofs of the houses and all the people clinging to the chimneys. "Tell that pot to stop!" they shouted. The little girl smiled and said, "Stop, pot, stop." And straight away the pot stopped and floated on the flood, as clean and black, as empty as before. The little girl sat down at the edge of the flood of porridge. She poured her blackberries onto it. She stirred them with her finger and she scooped up handfuls of the delicious mixture and gulped it down. As for her mother and the other people of the village, well, they had to eat their way indoors, but they didn't mind. After all, it was the sweetest, creamiest porridge in the world, and that was the end of that story. So boys and girls, sleep tight and take care, and we'll be in touch soon. Bye!